¿Cómo estás? Let's start healing. Hey everyone, I'm Adrienne Murchison, and thank you for returning to our Let's Start Healing podcast. It has been a little while and I have missed you. I just greeted you, of course, with ¿Cómo estás?, which is how are you in Spanish. And you know what we say, we have more in common than we think. And what we have in common can change the world. This episode is brought to you in part by Nicole Gabrielle Skincare and Cosmetics for today's lifestyle. Forward-thinking founder Nicole Gabrielle has been licensed in the aesthetics industry for more than 20 years and provides her high-quality cosmetic and skincare line with every type of face, lip, cheek, and body in mind. Nicole Gabrielle Skincare and Cosmetics are created especially for you. Products are available online at NicoleGabrielle.com. That's spelled NicoleGabrielle.com. Also, follow on Facebook and Instagram at Nicole Gabrielle Skincare. Before we get started, I want to invite you to listen to all of our episodes on a multitude of platforms. We are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and our podcast YouTube channel. As I said, it has been a minute and I have missed you so much. We are back here for 2 final episodes of our season 1, and we are going to return in January with a great lineup already in the works for our season 2. 2020 is already an awesome year for the Let's Start Healing podcast. We are in the holiday season in December, and this time of year is always a really good time of reflection for me. And being away from you for a few weeks, I've had a good amount of time to reflect. I've also shared a few videos on Instagram, so make sure you check those out, because I have been on a journey of letting go and allowing God to do what he does, to let him reveal whatever he would like to reveal to me personally that speaks to my purpose and his will. And it has been awesome. One of the things that has been noteworthy for me in being in a reflective space is how truly we are all connected. And oftentimes we say the same thing in different ways. What I'm doing here with this podcast, I have other friends who are doing pretty much the same thing in their own way. I have a friend who is working on a book on communication and connection, and it's really very similar to what we're doing here. And it speaks to how we speak different languages, but underneath our languages, when we really get to the heart of who we truly are, as I said, we have more in common than we think. And if we really resonate and pay attention to those spaces of what we have in common and how we're really saying the same things so many times, that's how we change the world. And for me, the reason that this podcast is just so natural for me is because I have always enjoyed connecting with the real essence of a person. That's who I want to get to know. Even when I'm getting to know someone in a professional way, say I'm in an office in the corporate world and I'm meeting someone, my real interest is not to talk to that person from a surface, or I should say connect with that person from a surface place. My real desire in terms of my spirit, or my real question is, who are you? Can we communicate from a place of who I am and who you are? And that's what we do here on this podcast. I love how folks in this first season have shared their spiritual path, and that's what the vehicle is for me. I feel that when we talk about our spirituality, it's such a personal thing. The willingness to share that is an honor for me, for people to share that with this podcast, and to be willing to share what you're about spiritually is a willingness to show up authentically. So it has been a blessing for me this first season. Our guest today is Carla D Giovanni, who is founder of Change Catapult Consulting. Carla is also a dear friend, and I'm so happy that she's on this podcast to talk about what she does. She is a business coach. She is an expert in change management, and she works with her clients in the area of emotional intelligence. Again, getting to an authentic place with her clients. She's going to talk to us about that. And it was really a childhood illness that she will share a little bit about that grounded her in mindfulness and guided her into the work that she does. So I'm very excited for you to meet Carla. So let's meet her. Let's get started and let's start healing. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you.
Carla is here with Charlie, her baby terrier. He's a little man.
In case you hear his heavy breathing in the mic.
So talk to us about some of your work as a coach and mindfulness training.
Yeah. So I am a consultant and coach, as you said. And I do change management work primarily, and then training in emotional intelligence. And that's where I bring mindfulness in. But the mindfulness also becomes really relevant to change management work because change is hard, as we all know, in every aspect of life. And so in work, just knowing how the mind works and being more present to the present moment helps people to not be fearful about the future, which is really what change management is about. It's about navigating an organization and its people through change.
And so, well, first, what is emotional intelligence?
So people use the term EQ. So it's IQ and EQ. So somebody can have a very high intellect and have a high IQ.
Yeah.
Emotional intelligence means that they have the emotional and communication skills.
That's Charlie in the background. He's like, I will not be left out.
Real. Yeah. No, he won't. So he's, I have to be mindful of my Charlie. So emotional intelligence is having the self-awareness and self-regulation and just presence, emotional presence to connect well with others and communicate in emotional context. So I think of it like circles that ripple out. And so the higher your emotional intelligence, the more you're able to constructively connect with others. So if you have a very high EQ, then you're also going to be a much more impactful leader.
As you're talking, I'm thinking about empathy.
Yes.
How does that play in?
Yeah. So empathy is one of the key. Empathy, compassion, understanding somebody else's perspective. All of that is extremely important and ingrained in sort of the definition or construct of EQ. So yes, if you have a well-developed EQ, then you have empathy and again, are able to connect with others through their needs and through where they're coming from emotionally versus, imposing your emotional presence or lens on them. So, yep.
Talk about your clients. You don't have to give us their names or anything like that.
Secret.
But what might someone come to you and say? Because I'm thinking that if a person doesn't have a high emotional IQ, maybe they don't know it, but maybe they do know it because maybe they've been told that in so many words. What are they saying when they first call you or
so if someone
you?
Calls me for a personal coaching type situation, a lot of times, honestly, they're in pain. And they might be not physical pain, emotional or mental pain. And it might be because they, personally are struggling with stress or just, again, navigating through change is kind of a common situation. Or they may be getting feedback from others. So people do things in corporate America like 360 evaluations, or, just feedback from people on their teams, and that they might be getting feedback that they're not having the impact on others that they hope to. So it's like my intended message is not being received the way that I want it to.
I see.
And so, just that negative leadership. Sometimes I get phone calls from people that they say, can you help this person? They're toxic. A lot of times it's a manager calling me about one of their team members.
Okay.
That, they're having a negative impact on the team. And so, can you work with them? And then again, sometimes it's somebody personally that reaches out and, asks for help because they are struggling, recognize that within themselves. But then if you roll it up to the organizational level, one of the big things right now that it's buzzy is like digital, and just applying technology to different corporations or organizations so that they can be more efficient and cutting edge and all that kind of stuff. If you think about that, it makes people automatically uncomfortable. So when we look at groups of people and you bundle everybody together, they don't have the skills to operate in the new environment. They might feel panicked about being less than or inadequate for the way the new world is going to go. And so it's like change management just rolls up all of those same issues into a group of people and then says, okay, what things can we do on a larger scale to try and impact and take groups along together or organizations. So it's really the same mindset. So the mindfulness thing that you're applying to an individual and just a corporation, you just use different tools and approaches to get there.
What are some of the tools you might use with a client to get them to open up, maybe let some walls down and be a little more emotional? Yeah.
So it's understanding starts, so I know enough that I can apply empathy. If I don't understand them and where they're coming from, then my automatic response is going to be to put it into my frame of reference and impose that on them. So if it's an organization, we do what's called a stakeholder assessment, and we will use all sorts of inputs to assess what's going on within the organization, or organizational assessment, stakeholder assessment. And with a coaching client, you do the same thing. So you would have like kind of an intake or assessment sessions. It can be multiple. And part of it is, just tell me why you want to work with me. So what's the problem or the pain point that you're trying to get to? And then those inputs that I was mentioning. So, do you have 360 evaluations? Do you have personality assessments? Like, what do you think about your impact? And so it really starts with me having an understanding of that person and then opening the conversation with my willingness and just receptiveness to just meet them exactly where they are. It's coming at them with, as much as possible, relinquishing my own ego and my own judgment of them so that they can feel free to just be on their own and just share whatever's going on with them authentically. And then that allows me to meet them with empathy and as much as possible kind of dig into things from their perspective instead of, again, I don't want to impose what I think they should be doing or what I think is going on. As much as possible, I want to try and understand the situation. Do you usually see a typical client for like 6 weeks or 1 or 2 sessions, or it's all over the place. It just depends. And sometimes I have ongoing relationships with people where I just work with them over the course of years, and sometimes it becomes more informal, and then sometimes I'm engaging with them on a project and our interaction is just going along those lines, all sorts of different ways. So what might you talk to them about, or do you do any exercises with them or anything to get them to sort of have an experience of what it could be like to engage with someone? Yeah. So again, a lot of it is like sort of an intake process. It's like, what are your goals and objectives? Like, what do you want to get out of our relationship? What pain point do you want to solve? What's going on with you? Trying to understand them. Honestly, getting a commitment from them, because a lot of people, it's like they know that they're in pain, but you and I have talked about this before. If somebody's not ready to face something, then it's just not the right time. And that's okay, but it's getting them to step up and own it and say that they're willing to be accountable and they're committed to the relationship between us, because it's not going to progress unless they're there. And so if they are committed and they're there, they're showing up. So then what is it, sort of like a therapist
client relationship where you're talking out work situations, things that are on their mind, or?
Yeah, I guess that's a fair comparison.
I mean, that's the way I see it, but I didn't know if you did some kind of exercises too, like role play or anything like that.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's the situations are so unique. So a lot of times it's a diagnostic type thing, like understanding. So a really common thing, especially if I work with men.
She said men.
I'm stereotyping, but men, unfortunately, are not socialized to be as in touch with their emotions. And so they struggle with naming their emotions, which is really the first step to understanding ourselves.
Right.
And there's research to support that. The more variety you're able to use in naming your own emotions, the higher your EQ is the general thought process. And so just starting somebody with, okay, here's a situation that I faced and maybe I wasn't happy with the outcome or I didn't feel good during the situation. And then just peeling the onion back, so to speak, and diagnosing, okay, I was mad. Okay, you felt mad, but why? And just doing this sort of diagnostic and really trying to name, maybe there was frustration in there. Maybe my ego was bruised. I felt inadequate and it was showing up as anger. But, and so that's a pretty consistent theme, is just helping people to pause and reflect in a safe space,
right,
with somebody who's willing to walk through something like that with them. And, sometimes then it's asking probing questions, or in the interest of me just understanding the cast of characters that they're dealing with, I'll ask questions about, who else was involved in the scenario and that kind of thing. And then I'm able to sort of guess at what might have been going on, or ask some probing questions and just follow my intuition a little bit with them.
Are there any other typical things that are going on, the common things that you see going on in different companies? Like you just mentioned, the technology,
yes,
is bringing up some kind of pain.
Yes, I think just change in general and the stress and just, people just have so much going on. That's probably the consistent theme, and they're just overstressed, and there's just a lack of focus because everyone's trying to multitask, and in the brain, there's really no such thing as multitasking. And so sometimes there's not anything wrong with anybody. It's not even like they have an emotional issue that I'm trying to correct. And this is where sometimes I have very short interactions with people because I just talk to them about how they can set their day up differently so they can focus on something. And it's really that easy. Like, are you blocking time out on your calendar? You can't be in the middle of a meeting and trying to respond to emails at the same time. And then, the result of that is you don't retain any of the information from the conversation or the emails or the notes and so I think people have this frenetic and stressed feeling all the time, which it shows up as anxiety and just stress, being frustrated or whatever else. And so sometimes you can make slight adjustments, just the way you conduct yourself on a day-to-day basis, that are helpful.
So, and when you say they have a lot going on, do you mean outside of work and inside of work, or just inside
bleeds,
of work?
It's like,
I think so.
It does. It's you're trying to set things up for your children, or order groceries for your family, or order a birthday present for your mother, and then all of these things that you've got going on at work, and planning family activities, and it's a lot for all of us.
I describe it to myself as 48 hours and 24 hours.
Yes.
Inside 24 hours.
Yes.
So
it's common, and it's all of us. We're just running and gunning so much. And to some extent, as much as I love technology and I can see where it brings benefits to people's lives, I think it caused everything to accelerate. The pace of everything is accelerated. People expect immediate responsiveness from you. So it's like the cadence of things that's coming at you and the expectation of others from how quickly you'll turn things around. It just puts so much pressure on all of us, and we're doing it to each other and we don't recognize it.
It's true. It's true. And I remember, maybe not, I would say within the last 2 years or 2 years ago, when I wouldn't get an email after 5 or 7 p.m. But now the emails can come anytime. They could come at midnight.
Absolutely. And we're more globally connected. So I work across at least all 3 time zones in the U.S. And so My day for work is extended because of that. Absolutely. So I think and just think about, I used to be pen pals with people when I was growing up. And it's like you'd send them a letter and you had no expectation really of when you were going to hear back from them. It was like...
That's so true.
And now you send somebody a text message and you think they're dying if you haven't heard back from them by like the end of the day. So it's just a totally different world. And it places expectation on all of us that that's where I think mindfulness and just mindfulness is really about being present in the moment. And we think about it so much in terms of our emotions. So people immediately understand what it's when we say, don't obsess over the future. That's going to cause you anxiety. So, the power of being in the now and just like, letting that go. But mindfulness is also about just focusing singularly on the thing that is in front of you.
Yes.
And it's amazing how when you focus on a task and you cut off distraction, it puts you automatically in the present moment and cuts off you ruminating about the past or obsessing about the future. And so it seems like a simple, really like a granular thing to do, to just say, I just want you to sit there and you have to write a deck, like a PowerPoint presentation. I just want you to block 50 minutes on your calendar to take in all of those inputs and then do an outline of that presentation and only focus on that one thing. Shut your phone off, shut your email off, and just focus. And that's actually training us. It seems like, okay, I'm just doing this silly task in a different way, but it's also training your brain to retain focus.
To get back to focus.
Yes, but we're all operating like the fidget spinner, society that we have now. And our brains are we're contributing on a day-to-day basis to our brains having this like frenetic response. Nobody reads books anymore. I used to get in trouble when I was growing up. My mom would tell me to put the book down because I was reading too much. And it's like now I'm like reading these short articles on Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever. And so we're constantly shortening our attention span and we're creating an inability to focus. So that's part of mindfulness too, that doesn't feel as emotional, but it actually contributes to us being able to be more mindful of everything in our life.
So how did you get into this? We were talking a little bit offline. Does this relate to your childhood?
Yes.
And so will you share that with the audience?
Yeah. So for the audience, I had a really lovely childhood in terms of, my family. I have a great family and grew up in a safe neighborhood, loving neighbors. And
you're from Detroit originally?
Yes, the suburbs of Detroit, Michigan. So, and wonderful extended family, all that good stuff. So, apple pie, baseball, America, rah, rah. But when I was, I guess about 3 years old, my mom will tell you I had like a strep or an ear infection or something, and it actually triggered me the onset of juvenile rheumatoid arthritis. So it was all of a sudden I went from being, I'm the fourth child.
She has 3 older brothers. Are they older? They're older, right?
They're all older. Yes.
A set of twins.
And then my other brother's a year younger, so they're almost like triplets. And then I was sort of the happy surprise. The only girl and the baby and number 4. And so, I was progressing as far as my mom had 3 kids before me. They were boys, but I was progressing normally,
Right.
And she was around my cousins and all that good stuff. So anyhow, it was like all of a sudden I physically didn't want to do and wasn't progressing and was, I don't remember, I'm told, screaming my head off. Like, especially I would take a nap and I would wake up and I would be in pain because that's what happens with arthritis. You sort of settle in. That's why people struggle to wake up in the morning and that.
So was this all over your body?
Yes.
And rheumatoid means... What does that word mean?
So rheumatoid arthritis is systemic. So it's through your entire body. Osteoarthritis is the one that people get from, like football players get it from wear and tear on their knees.
Okay.
So it's a different type. So I'm not a doctor, so that's my disclaimer, but it's really your immune system is attacking itself with any of the rheumatic diseases. So there's usually a trigger, and then that trigger sets your immune system off, and then you get, like a histamine reaction, like your nose gets stuffed up, you take an antihistamine.
Right.
It's really the same kind of thing, and they settle in your joints, and then you get, I don't know if you want to say like congestion. I'm not using doctor terms. I'm using Carla terms. But and so that's where you see people get like their knuckles get cramped up. And so it actually feels like you feel frozen. You almost feel like mummified when you wake up. Like you're in pain, but it's like you are incapable of moving.
Goodness.
So my mom has asked me so many times to describe, because I actually inherited this from my dad's side of the family. We have other family members. It's very typical that autoimmune disorders are hereditary.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom will say, what does it feel like? Like she'll try and understand. It feels almost like someone put like rubber bands around your hands, and that feeling like I'm being constricted. I mean, you just cannot function the way that, or your knee or whatever it is. It's impossible in the moment to function. And so I know now, but what happens in your brain is just the same way that your body is freezing up, your brain freezes up. And so, I mean,
really,
think if
literally.
Well, think if you're like 3 or 4 years old and you wake up and you can't move. Like you don't have adult coping skills or adult life experience to say, like what's going on with me? You just wake up and you panic, essentially.
Right.
And so, we know now we can image the brain and everything. So you've heard the fight or flight response before.
Yeah.
So what happens in the fight or flight response is, you get epinephrine and adrenaline because your body's getting ready to either fight or flight. And so your blood flow goes out to your limbs. In your brain, actually, you get a panic response in your brain and it shuts off. I guess that's kind of a dramatic term because it's not completely shut off. But your executive control center, which is where your logic and like your higher level reasoning come from, that's not where like your oxygen and your blood, like that's not the part of the brain that's lit up. When you're in a panic response, it's that survival part of your brain. And so, again, as a child, you don't have even the reasoning skills to get beyond that
just
panic
happening.
response. Yes. And so, in my case, I just cried for my mom or my dad or my brothers or whatever. You're just in pain. But it's interesting because then as an adult, when I see people are in pain or in panic and they're crying out and they're locked up in the same way that I was crying out or locked up as a kid. So it's the same. Fundamentally,
so
we're all
emotional
the same.
pain, you're saying.
Yeah. And it manifests in our brain really kind of the same way.
Yeah.
And so, looking back on yourself as a child is always interesting because it's like you're looking back on yourself with an adult lens.
Yes.
You didn't have those thoughts when you were a kid. So it's, you're trying to understand yourself. And so when I ventured into adulthood, I would get like, I guess you'd say flare up is the term that they use with arthritis.
From childhood into adulthood, you'd get it
occasionally. And it's like, to some extent, I kind of know like damp, cold weather, I might wake up and not feel great, certain things like that. But sometimes it just felt like it was a little bit out of nowhere.
Okay.
And so what I started to recognize in myself, and I had someone help diagnose me, is I had like a mild post-traumatic stress syndrome, which is essentially my brain was in overdrive of that panic response. So a trigger shows up. We think of like soldiers coming back from war and they have PTSD. Well, their trigger might be the sound of like gunfire. It could be like the smell of gunpowder. It can be a lot of things. And for me, it was like that feeling of, sometimes I did have triggers that were like medicine type taste and that kind of thing, but it wasn't super dramatic with me. It was just pain would be like the onset of physical pain. My brain would automatically start thinking, oh gosh, this is the start of something. And so I'd go into that panic response. And so with autoimmune disorders, it's interesting because the mind, body, spirit connection is so significant. It has such an impact. It's not, people think of arthritis as like, oh, you have crusty old lady hands. No, it's your whole body. And so what I've learned over the last 40 something years of having the disease is I try and maintain equilibrium is sort of how I characterize it when I talk to people. So I don't want to eat things that are going to trigger like even a subtle allergic response.
What might that be?
It can be anything it's different things for different people.
Okay.
Yeah. So for me, it's like sulfates and molds and that kind of thing can do it. But I also have healthy things. Like I can't eat too much spinach.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
I had food testing and found.
Yeah.
But, not a ton of alcohol and making sure I'm hydrated and I get enough sleep and just doing all the things that we all
I was
know.
about to say that's what we should all do.
I guess it's like my immune system, the way I look at it is it's like more vigilant. Like your immune system protects you too.
Right.
So you might get stuffed up because somebody's perfume bothers you or whatever. It's if you just take that response and just internalizing it and look at it systemically, that's really kind of how autoimmune disorders are.
So this was very profound for you in terms of your work.
Yes.
That led to you going into the work that you're doing.
Yeah. Thank you. You said that so well. Yeah, no, absolutely. So what I learned in my 20s, I got introduced actually by a former client who is still a dear friend of mine to, I was raised Catholic and my parents are still to this day very pious and committed. And we were raised in the church. We had great aunts that were nuns and my family's very involved in the church. And so I always had a sense of faith.
Right.
But and you know too, being in Catholic community and that, it just was a different mindset than what was it benefiting me emotionally. And so this client of mine introduced me to A Course in Miracles. And I had sort of ventured into more like a non-denominational approach to my faith and less rule driven. But I think A Course in Miracles just blew everything open for me.
Yeah.
And so
how did it do that?
The church to me is so like externally driven because it's so focused on like, don't sin and, all of these. And A Course in Miracles really turned it inside and let me believe that like I could make the change. And it was already there. I just had to tap into what was there.
How did you do that? Like, what was the thing that you tapped into that you think that the Course helped you with?
It's kind of where, I guess, the mindfulness meditation, we didn't use that term at the time because this is 20-something years ago. I was working with the woman, though, that diagnosed me with mild post-traumatic stress. So I don't want to be super dramatic. Like I'm not characterizing myself like a soldier, but I just had like an overinflated panic response that was like subtly going on in my brain all the time. So she worked with me and she did use a hypnosis technique with me that they use at the time they were using it with like Vietnam veterans. And so in doing that and doing the hypnosis, and she was a spiritual woman too, and then me doing the Course in Miracles at the same time, it's like it all sort of intersected that I was able to relax. So I sort of learned the relaxation through the hypnosis technique. I already knew how to pray, and so I could focus and kind of calm myself down through that. But again, it's like the prayer that we're taught growing up. I still love it to this day, but it's the recitation, like almost that chanting of like the Our Father and the Hail Mary and like say the Rosary. And it feels so external. It's like I just have to get the words out of my mouth. And so it's like when you're doing the hypnosis, you're talking like to yourself, but almost in like spirit form. And that to me is what A Course in Miracles just gave me a construct or a language to use to do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, you were able to connect with yourself through prayer and God, and you felt God inside of you.
Yes.
The Spirit of God within you.
Yes.
So you were connected. Everything was connected, and you felt that you could heal.
Yes, absolutely. And I think I saw other people in a different way as well. It's intuitively, I think I always did, but the Course just gave me a different language sort of to think about that and how to approach it. So it just, I think that's probably what started to shift like my empathy and my ability to connect with people too.
Oh, really? Were you resistant in any way before?
Yeah, I mean, probably without realizing it. It's just, social norms and that sort of thing. And I think part of it too is just age. Like as you get older, you just don't really care what's the right thing and the wrong thing to do. Yeah. And then, but I feel like it's interesting and we've had this conversation in, our groups and stuff that we connect with. I connect with so many people now that have autoimmune disorders.
Yeah, I was about to ask you about that. People get in touch with you and
absolutely.
What do they want advice? Are they just diagnosed or?
Well, so think about if all of a sudden you're faced with the health condition that I described, your whole life is going to change. I mean, I talked to a woman the other day who has had to resign from her job because she physically cannot handle the demands of her job. And so, that's a real thing that you might just need some hardcore advice on how to navigate, how do I become self-employed, or how do I find a work from home job, or whatever it is. But it's also just the emotional and spiritual implications of all of a sudden your future looks completely different than you thought it was going to.
Yeah, it's occurring to me that I think, and maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but I feel like a lot of us don't really understand arthritis. Right. When I was growing up, I certainly heard of it all the time. I think I saw commercials related to arthritis, and I used to have this pain in my shoulder. I still do sometimes, but relentlessly in my left shoulder. So when it would come up, I would say, oh, my arthritis is kicking up, because that was a term that we would hear. I think a lot of people don't know if they haven't had an experience with it. They might not really understand what it is, or they think of it as inflammation. And it's not simply inflammation, or is it?
I mean, that's a part of it.
Right.
So, even in my body, if I do a workout, it's going to take, if you took a version of me that didn't have arthritis, if I had a clone that didn't have arthritis, it would take that clone less time to heal from like a strenuous workout than it would me. Because itis is inflammation. Your body just doesn't heal, as well either. But you're right. I think most people don't understand. And there are over like 100 rheumatic diseases. And I think people also don't. I think the number I last heard was there's like 900,000 children in the United States that have arthritis or some form of it.
No kidding.
Yeah, because you can get uveitis in your eyes, juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, in adults, fibromyalgia. So there are so many different kinds of rheumatic diseases that have... They're systemic, they impact your immune system. And so, yes. And
do you do work with the Arthritis Foundation?
I do. I was leading a support group. So I was co-leading with a friend of mine. I'm not the co-leader anymore, but there is still a support group. If anybody listening is interested, you should pursue that through the website. It's a great, avenue to get the emotional and spiritual support and guidance on resources and that sort of thing. So it's a wonderful group. But yeah, so and then I still do like fundraising things and volunteering with the foundation.
And there's a walk in May? Isn't there a walk?
Yep. There's a walk in May. There's a Jingle Bell Run in December. Those happen all over the country. So depending on where you live, you check the date on the foundation website.
And what's the walk? How far is it?
I think if you actually like clocked it, it might be slightly less, but I think it's like a 1 mile walk and then a 5K fun run. So,
okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Well, so I like to ask people healing questions on our podcast.
I like it.
How would you describe your knowing or perception of God?
I would say it's a universal energy that connects all of us. So that's the Holy Spirit manifestation that lives in, we is one, as we say. So one energy, one people.
And this isn't one of the healing questions, but what is your spiritual practice? I know you meditate often. Do you have a routine that you normally do during the day or in the mornings?
Yeah. Sometimes I can be inconsistent because, as you know, I travel for work and that kind of stuff. So, but in general, I do a meditation in the morning, and then I usually do 2 spiritual readings. So I still subscribe to an e-newsletter that's a traditional Christian, Bible verses and that sort of thing. And then I usually do another one that's based on A Course in Miracles. So, yeah. Yes. And then during the day, I do a gratitude practice during the day as well, that I usually journal.
Oh, do you?
Yeah.
So you might, in the afternoon, you might pull out your journal and just write down things you're grateful for?
Yeah. It's like, that's generally how things go. But if I'm in a client meeting, I'm not just going to say, excuse me while I write in my gratitude journal.
It's time.
Yes.
Well, so how powerful has that been for you in terms of the journal?
Huge. Yeah, I just think approaching things just with an attitude of gratitude, it's a nice little moniker, but, and then I look for moments of gratitude throughout the day. Mm-hmm. And so just pausing, because I think for a while I recognized in myself that I was just like putting myself on the spot. Like I have to come up with 3 things to be grateful for to write in my journal. And so I found it to be a more profound experience for me. And it came through some of my mindfulness training that I do, because I train classes with clients sometimes too. And so we give people exercises like, go eat your lunch. Like we're going on break, go eat your lunch and actually close your eyes and chew your food and notice the texture of it and notice if it's salty. Is it too salty? Is it too sweet? And so I started doing that with other people and then recognize like what an experience that was for me, just to pause in the moment and have gratitude for whatever it was that I was experiencing.
Yeah, that's powerful. Mm-hmm. I think it's really a cool thing to do if you can in the middle of the day, because I have a thing about how, I can just sort of really get in my ego during those hours of the afternoon, kind of forget to be present and get wrapped up. So I think that's a gratitude journal, such a great idea. Yes. To kind of ground you.
And just those gratitude experiences. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, sometimes I'll take Charlie, that you heard earlier, my dog, for a walk. Like if I have a break in between meetings, and just go enjoy the sunshine and, the flowers and people in the neighborhood or whatever it is, right. Just to get out of, like you're saying. And we're talking earlier about frenetic brains and like not being focused.
Right.
That's just another way that you can take that pause in that moment and just remind yourself of the life that's in you and the life that is around you.
Right. So, yeah. When do you most feel the presence of the Spirit of God?
I do think meditation has made that, but we all have moments where you're meditating and you don't. I mean, you feel like an absence of presence. So it can also be when I'm having a connection with another person. So you have, what we call a holy instant, where you have, usually it's a moment of vulnerability. And again, that's what's so interesting. It's like our pain that seems to connect us with people most profoundly. And so you'll have just this moment where you connect with somebody in that holy instant. And then I feel the presence of God, like that connection with the other person. And I remember I'm not a person.
Right.
It's one love or one force that unites us.
Right. What do you think God calls you to do for yourself and others through the work that you're doing?
Probably exactly what we said. Just remind myself and others that the connection is always there, that the Holy Spirit is always in us. And it's just a matter of putting the world aside so that you can access it.
Right. Yeah. It's so amazing to me how we can just forget.
For like 23 hours and 50 minutes a day.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
Tell me about a time when you had a miracle or a blessing and said, God totally did this. I had nothing to do with it.
Oh gosh, it's hard to pick one. I have a friend who let me think how long we've been friends. For 19 years now. And she started out as my client too, amazingly. And she and I will tell each other all the time. I met her. She was my client, and I was in meetings with her and, worked with her for a little while. And one day I just asked her, because I stayed in a hotel where she lived. And I said, hey, would you be interested in going out to dinner one night? Mm-hmm. And I knew off the bat that I wanted her spiritual perspective. And we were friends from there on out. And to this day, she's one of my dearest friends. Mm-hmm. And she and I will say all the time that we just wouldn't have naturally like crossed paths with each other. Like God had to have like had his hand in putting us together. Mm-hmm. And, there's age difference between us. We're different races. We're from different types of families, all different. We grew up in different cities, all sorts of things. But she's had one of the most profound spiritual impacts on my life for the past, almost 20 years, and vice versa. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Would you say that you are a healer or a seeker or both?
I think we're all healers, or we all have the opportunity to be. And I'm definitely a seeker too, so I would say both. Yeah.
What are you seeking?
I think just, we're teasing about forgetting 23 hours and 50 minutes a day. Yeah. So I guess I know that I don't need to know what it is I'm seeking. I seek to remember it more often or for a greater part of the day.
Yeah.
So I want to flip it to it's only 10 minutes a day that I forget.
Mm-hmm.
And it's 23 hours and 50 minutes that I am present with spirit.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Carla, for,
thank you. It's been
doing
fun.
this. Yes. And this doesn't have to be the only time.
Oh, good. And I'm so relieved that Charlie was quiet.
Yes.
you.
Well, we're going to have a photo of you and Charlie.
Okay.
If somebody wanted to get in touch with you, can they email you regarding coaching and consulting?
Yeah, that's probably the best way to reach me. So my email address is Carla with a C, Carla, at changecatapult.com. So all one word, Change Catapult.
And Catapult spelled the traditional way.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you for joining us. Remember, you can listen to all of our podcasts on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, and our podcast YouTube channel. Let's start healing.